What's up, AP Psych? Welcome back. This is our third topic in our development unit. We touched on kind of the debate over nature versus nurture and genetics and environmental factors and how those impact our development. And now we're getting into the actual stages. So first, we will start with prenatal and newborn, kind of move on through the lifespan from there. So conception is where we begin. And obviously we know this is when a male sperm fertilizes a female egg. At this point, the egg blocks all other sperm. It's got what it needs to develop into a growing human. So at this point, women are born with all the eggs they'll ever have. We talked about that in class, right? Usually only 1 out of 5,000 actually matured. And by the time women hit puberty, they'll have reduced from about 1 million eggs total to begin with down to about 300,000 or 400,000. And only about 300 or 400 of those will ever be produced during the reproductive cycle. Okay, so there's a limited amount. Men, on the other hand, begin producing sperm at puberty and produce it 24/7 for the rest of their life. Although as they age, there is some degradation to quality and reproductive quality with that. So once conception has occurred, this new one-cell entity contains 23 pairs of chromosomes. Right, one member of the pair comes from the mother, and the other pair comes from the father. Okay, so females are XX, males are XY. The male donates, if the male passes on the Y, the fetus or the zygote or whatever you want to call it at this point will develop into a male. If it passes on an X, it will develop into a female. So each chromosome contains thousands of genes. Either individually or in combination, these genes produce the particular characteristics of each person. And down here you can see the 23 pairs of chromosomes within a certain person. Now, genes are also composed of sequences of DNA. These genes compose sequences of DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, right? These molecules. And some genes are responsible for the development of systems common to all people, right? Your heart, circulatory system, brain, lungs, all of those things. While others control characteristics that make each human unique, like your eye color, your height, your facial features, and things like that. Sex is also determined by a combination of genes, specifically of the 23rd chromosome, right? So that's how we get our sex and all of our different characteristics from the genes that make up our DNA. And as that develops, eventually, this fertilized egg will become a zygote, right? And that's what it's called, a fertilized egg. It's fewer than 1/2 survive the first 2 weeks of pregnancy. So think about that. Half, for all the pregnancies that are out there, if you multiply that by 2, people have been pregnant that many times, but only half of them survive the first 2 weeks, and those women don't even know that they're pregnant. Then you move into the embryonic stage from weeks 2 to 8. Right? At 2 weeks, the zygote becomes an embryo. By 4 weeks, the embryo has developed a rudimentary beating heart, brain, and intestinal tract. Okay, they're very primitive, but they can be recognized in scans and in imaging. So we're talking about just the basic brain stem. We're not getting yet to the cerebral cortex and the more advanced, higher level parts of the brain, as those will still develop well into young adulthood. And by 8 weeks, the embryo is about 1 inch long, and it has arms, legs, and a face that are distinct. Okay. So here's those first few stages, right? Zygote. Okay. Then we develop into the beginning or the midpoint of the embryonic stage, and you can start to see somewhat of a figure. And then by the end of the embryonic stage, you can see the eyes, the head, the brain are developing, vestiges of the arms and the legs, things like that. So once we move from embryonic stage, we move to the fetal stage. And this is from 8 weeks all the way up until birth. We call it the fetus, right? So by around 4 months, fetal movement is strong enough to be detected by the mother. And that can kind of fluctuate depending on who the mother is and the development of the fetus. But that's about generally on average when the mother first detects that first movement. And around 6 months, eyelids open and the fetus has well-developed grasp and even taste buds, which is kind of crazy to think about. The fetus has taste buds before it's even born. Once the fetus reaches the age of viability, that's about 24 weeks. That's the point at which it can survive outside the womb. Okay, and when we say survive outside the womb, we're talking about 50% of the babies who need to be, emergency born at this point, or who are naturally born at this point. 50% of them survive, and that's the age of viability. From then, fetus continue to grow and gain weight during the last 2 months of the pregnancy, and at the end of a normal 38-week cycle, which is about 9.5 months, a fetus typically weighs around 7 pounds and is about 20 inches in length. And obviously, every pregnancy and birth is different, and they happen at different times. But again, this is the average length and the average pounds and length that we're talking about. So let's talk about some genetic and environmental influences on the prenatal fetus. First, genetic factors. These are a major cause of genetic defects, and it's usually because of faulty genes or chromosomes. So you have PKU, which is a rare issue with babies that has an inability to break down protein, which can cause some serious issues in terms of development, both mentally and physically. Then you have Tay-Sachs disease, which is similar in the sense that it's an inability to break something down, but in this case, it's fat. And this can cause substances to build up and destroy brain and nerve cells until the nervous system essentially shuts down. So babies usually start exhibiting signs of this disease around 4 to 6 months old, and will usually die by the age of 5. So it's a really tragic diagnosis, tragic disease. If parents carry both genetic defect, the child has a 1 in 4 chance of being born with the disease, which shows a very large genetic link. And it seems to occur most frequently in Central and Eastern European Jewish populations, which also has a reference to culture and people marrying others who are similar to them and having children with people who are similar to them and similar genetic issues in the population. So we'll finish up prenatal and genetics with Down syndrome. And this occurs when a zygote receives an extra chromosome at the moment of conception. So instead of 23, now there's 24. It can usually lead to intellectual disability. In the mild to moderate range, it is like kind of a range or a spectrum of the impact, but it's often related to a mother's age as well. It's more common in babies born to mothers over the age of 35. Some of the common characteristics you'll notice: facial features, upward slanting eyes, smaller noses, ears, and mouth, and sometimes smaller hands or shorter necks. And like we said, as it does cause some level of mild to moderate intellectual disability, it also can often be accompanied by other health problems involving your heart, your vision, and your hearing. Now, moving from genetic influences to environmental factors that impact the prenatal situation. We've mentioned teratogens before, but these are any environmental agents such as drugs, chemicals, viruses, or other things that can produce a birth defect. Okay. One large example: mother's illnesses. Rubella, German measles, can cause blindness, deafness, heart abnormalities, and even stillbirth. Syphilis can cause intellectual disability, physical deformities, and miscarriages. And AIDS can be passed on to a child prior to birth. Okay. These are just a couple examples. Any illnesses the mother goes through during pregnancy can potentially have an impact on the fetus. Outside of illness, there are also things, unfortunately, like a mother's use of drugs. Illegal drugs like cocaine can result in a baby being born addicted to those illegal drugs. And you can think about, how much adults struggle with going through withdrawal and getting off of a drug. Well, if a child or a fetus is born with that addiction, it really has a problem handling it, can often lead to death because of that, those withdrawal symptoms. And even some legal drugs can cause fetal abnormalities. And this is why doctors are very, very careful about prescribing any type of prescription drug, and even over-the-counter medicines to women when they're pregnant, to ensure that they're not going to cause or introduce any teratogens that could have an impact on development. Alcohol and nicotine use, far more common than you would think and that we would like to expect. A common condition is fetal alcohol syndrome, and it results in intellectual and physical developmental disabilities. Some of those features associated with FAS Babies are born abnormally small, small eyes, upturned nose, or a small or abnormally formed brain because of the introduction of alcohol during development. And some, or most, have a degree of intellectual disability, and many exhibit problems with attention span, learning, coordination, and behavior. In addition, smoking we know has an impact in stunts growth and development. So imagine what that does to a fetus, right? It does the exact same thing. There's fewer nutrients received by that fetus, so it results in lower birth weight, and heavy smoking may impact the brain. Okay, so this is more so in the line of mother's choices and how that impacts the baby, as well as illness and genetics. Okay. So our last topic, newborns. So we've now proceeded to move from zygote to embryo to fetus to now being born. You're now a newborn baby, and all babies are born with a number of reflexes, either unlearned. These are unlearned involuntary responses that occur automatically in the presence of certain stimuli. So some of these reflexes that all newborns have or should have, and they do tests to make sure they do. And if they don't have some of these reflexes, they know that there may be some intellectual or developmental disabilities that they need to address. So the rooting reflex is the automatic turning of the head when your cheek is touched. It kind of is an indication to the infant that there may be some food, right? Because they can't really control their hands or arms yet to grasp anything to eat it. So that rooting reflex tells them to turn their head and potentially be fed. In addition, that goes along with the sucking reflex. Anything that touches their lips, they'll try to put in their mouth, whether it's a finger, a pacifier. It's part of being fed as a newborn infant. You also have the startle reflex, and this is in response to a loud noise. There's some type of loud noise, bang, or disruption. The infant flings their arms out and fans their fingers out and arches their back in response to this sudden noise. This is one of those reflexes that actually continues into adulthood. And if you've ever seen the movie Elf with the Jack in the Box, he has a very, very hard time stopping his startle reflex from occurring, because it's meant to, even as adults, protect. If you hear a loud noise or a bang, or you're scared by someone, you kind of jump, put your hands up, close your eyes, and bring your shoulders up. It's meant to protect your eyes, ears, and the back of your neck, these vulnerable areas. And it's potentially supposed to help you escape a bad situation. Then you also have the Babinski reflex. This is when our toes fan out when the edge of the sole of the foot is stroked. So if this is the baby's foot, and the doctor will just go along the bottom or the base of it, and the baby's feet will just fan up, right? They think this is in an effort to move the foot away from whatever the stimuli is, but it's a good test to make sure that the baby is developing appropriately neurologically. And last, you have the palmar reflex. Babies will grasp anything placed in the palm of their hand. You can see this if you put your pinky in a baby's hand or anything, a toy, they'll automatically kind of grasp around it. Almost all of these reflexes, aside from the startle reflex, are lost after the first few months of age and are replaced by more complex behaviors. So around 6 months, these start to disappear, and the babies can start processing things as their brain develops and behavior becomes more complex. Okay? But a lot of these are still used as a baby develops to make sure that they are developing appropriately. And if these reflexes remain after that 6-ish month range, they know there may be some underlying issues with neurological development. So that wraps up our very quick intro to prenatal and newborn. And we'll be moving on from here. And we'll do some things in class to talk about some of these reflexes and go back over teratogens and things like that. But in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions.